Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for today's webinar on how to reuse pipelines, distribute workloads, and collaborate. Just to let everyone know a few things up top. One, we are recording, so we will be making the recording and the slides available later on. If you, for whatever reason, you need to leave early or a colleague was unable to join, you will be able to see the rest of this later. Two, we are going to have time at the end for questions, so as soon as you think of something, please feel free to put it directly into that chat or the question panel, and we'll get to it at the end. Beyond that, I don't want to take up too much more time. Oh, there is one more thing. At the very, very end, a survey will pop up. It is very short. It's just going to ask you what you thought and what you'd like to learn more about in the future. If you could fill that out for us, we'd really appreciate it. Beyond that, I don't want to take up too much more time. I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, one of our customer success architects, Miguel Suarez. Miguel?
Thank you, Max. Hello, everybody. As Max said, I'm a customer success architect here at CloudBees, and today I will be talking about pipelines, which is probably the most important part of Jenkins and CloudBees Core. We will talk about how you can share them, distribute work across teams using masters. We will expand this topic to applications, masters, core cluster architecture, and other features available in your CloudBees Core cluster. So this is the agenda. First, we're going to talk briefly about distributed pipeline architecture, what it means and what it's trying to solve. We will later talk about the demo itself, what I have set up in terms of the demo application, the environment, and the CloudBees cluster. Then we will dive into marker files, pipeline template catalogs, and cross-team collaborations. Also, what they're trying to solve and how to send them up and use them. And last, I will do a quick demo to show how all the features come together. So if you didn't have a chance to check my previous webinar, here's the link. And my previous webinar was about the Operations Center itself and the motivation to use it. We discussed how the Operations Center can help eliminating Jenkins times, which are monolith Jenkins that can bring down your whole CI/CD process, and also how the Operations Center can eliminate Jenkins sprawl, which are disconnected Jenkins instances with no visibility or control. Ideally, you should have the Operations Center in the middle of your core cluster, provisioning and managing common functionalities like authorization, authentication, cluster ops like updates and plugin management, allocate, share agents, and other things related to other masters. The architecture diagram right here, oops, it's what we would like to achieve. Distributed pipeline architecture where you have control and visibility from the Operations Center, but also the ability to distribute your CI/CD pipelines across multiple masters and agents. So having multiple masters can also bring challenges as well. These are a few common challenges that you can see when adoption increases and more teams are onboarded on core. First, we have lack of pipeline reusability. In this case, Jenkins files are only written for a specific application without thinking about how they can be reused by other teams. Then we have lack of company standards where some applications just don't follow the company-wide recommended CI/CD stages or practices. Then we have code duplication when different teams are writing the same or very similar Jenkins files or shared libraries. Another common challenge is that there is no coordination between teams. So that means that it slows down the feedback between teams when they are waiting for jar packages or Docker images across masters. And last is about shared libraries. Shared libraries are great in general and should still be used to an extent following best practices, but sometimes they can become a complex and hard to maintain project itself, where only a few people know how they're implemented. By the way, if you want to know more about shared libraries and how to use them, I recommend to go to our training website and then look for the intermediate pipeline class where they talk about shared libraries. So before starting to talk about the features and how you can use them and how we can solve these problems, I want to put some context for the core setup that I have for this demo. We're going to have, in this scenario, two teams, the API team and the UI UX team. They're both going to collaborate in the to-do application. We also have the API team testing new emerging technologies and services that will be later integrated to the to-do application, but they're not quite ready yet. Putting an example scenario can give you a better idea on how to use some of these features and how you can architect your cluster. This is definitely not a production-ready setup and can be improved to scale and have a full CI/CD process, but my goal is to provide you some information that can be used in your particular scenario. So here's the to-do application on the bottom right. We have a screenshot of how it looks. It's based out of 3 components: the front end UI and 2 backend services, the backend location and the backend to-do CRUD. So the front end to-do has to do with the UI. It's built on React. Backend location service is a backend service written on Spring Boot, so Java. And the backend to-do CRUD is written with using Node.js Express and connecting to a Mongo database. So the reason I chose these languages is to have not all the applications are written on the same language, and we want to be able to write pipelines so we can reuse across applications. At the same time, this location service, what it does is connect external REST APIs to get the geolocation that is displayed here, and also the time zone for the application itself. So here is briefly how it looks. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but just so you know that it's live. So it reads and it says that I'm in Flagami, which is a place in Florida, and I have it already. A few of the tasks I've used VPN to. I don't want to use VPN right now, but I tested this out with different IPs and I was able to call the correct services. All right. Now, we have that repo for that to-do API, and then we also talk about another repo, which is called the emerging technologies. This repo, in this case, it's maintained by the API team as well, but they just need a way to have a fast CI/CD process. They don't have a Jenkins files or pipelines, and this is where we're gonna try to use one of their features to provide fast pipelines to them. The idea is while these services get mature, then we're gonna migrate and have all the pipelines centralized. So up to now, we have the to-do repos, and with all the microservices, backend and front end, we have the emerging technologies repos maintained by the API team. And now we have a third set of repos named shared pipelines. In shared pipelines, we have all the pipeline code that we are going to provide to that to-do app and the emerging technologies. First, we have a custom marker pipeline repo, and this repo is intended to provide the pipelines to the emerging technology services using custom marker files. We will show how this works in a moment, but this is how more or less the structure is. Second, we have a pipeline template catalog repo, and this repo will be used to provide pipelines to that to-do application. And third, we have a repo that is a shared library that will be used by this pipeline template catalog. So these two will work together, and these will work separate. Okay, so we have the application, we have our repos. Now, how do we set up the cluster based on what we know about the teams? First, we create, I have some background, I've created the operations center in GKE, so in Kubernetes, and I've created 2 masters, the API managed master, which is gonna be for the API team, and the UI UX managed master that it's gonna be for that team. Now, you can see that I've put this inside folders. We strongly recommend to put all your resources inside folders. That way, you can control who can access them thanks to RBAC, which is controlled by the operations center. That way, I can say this group of users can only access this master, and the UI UX users can access the managed master. Other technologies that you will probably see in the demo, it's Chart Museum, where I store the TARS for my Helm charts for the applications. Then we have Canico that helps build the Docker images. Helm, which is package management for applications in Kubernetes, and I'm storing all the images in GCR, in Google Container Registry. Also to know that this demo is on version 2.176.3.2, which is the latest version that we have. All right, let's talk about custom marker files. So the custom marker file feature is an easy and fast way to provide pipelines to repositories that have a specific file called a marker file. Pipelines and repos can be in separate or the same GitHub organizations or Bitbucket teams. This is what we're going to implement for the emerging technologies repos in our case, as they need a fast way to have simpler pipelines. On the left, we have the repo structure for custom marker files. This is a recommended structure and naming, but you can name the Jenkins file something different and have different folders and folder names. On the right, we have both repos under emerging technologies that use the pipelines. So what we're gonna do in this case, we're gonna set up a GitHub organization job. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna scan emerging technologies and gonna find that Java app and match this repo with this pipeline that we have on this shared pipelines repo. Same thing with Node.js. It's gonna scan again the whole GitHub organization, and it's gonna attach the Jenkins file to this Node.js. So that way we can just tell an application team, please just put this marker file in your repo, and I will just have a CI/CD process for you. So this is a great way to get new teams on board with a pipeline that you already have. Okay, so how do we use that? I'm gonna show a video on how to set it up. So let me pause here for a second before starting. So here I'm I create a folder, GK manage masters. I created another folder, as I said, to contain my managed master. I want to keep everything organized to use RBAC. And I created a folder named emerging services. Now you can notice that here I've configured this folder, so the only thing that I can create is a GitHub organization. You want to keep everything that you create, you want to make sure that it's what it's supposed to be created in that folder. So we're going to name that and then create the GitHub organization. So the first thing we're going to do here, we are going to populate which repo it's the one that needs the pipelines. So in our case, Buzz Emerging Technologies is what needs the pipelines. So that matches that has two applications with no pipelines. Next step is to delete that, because we are not going to look for a Jenkins file in that, and we're going to select custom script. Now in here is where we're going to put which marker file inside this application is the one that the job is going to be scanning. So in this case, we've told this team, hey, put a file named .java app. We're going to look for that, and then we're going to use a pipeline from this other Git repo that I'm going to configure right here, which is the Buzz shared pipelines repo. Now, you don't have to have this in different repos. You can have it in the same repos if you want, but I think it's better to have them separate so each repo or each GitHub organization can focus to one thing. One thing is for applications themselves, and the other one is just for pipelines. So in here, I'm putting the path where the Jenkins file is. So let's stop here for a second. We configure where the pipeline is coming from and where is that file. So this is for the Java applications. Then we're going to do the same for the Node.js applications. We're going to select that marker file, put it there in the custom script, and then point to the custom or the shared pipelines repo where the Jenkins file is going to be. So again, we select that repo. You can use credentials if you need to. In my case, it's the same credentials because I only have one user. And then we put, again, the path where that Jenkins file is. So we're going to speed this up a little bit. All right, so after this, we already selected where the pipelines are coming from and which repo it's the one meeting the pipelines. Here, the last step that I selected is that I don't want the branches to build automatically because you can have multiple branches with multiple microfiles and you don't want to trigger all those builds at the same time. So here's what happens. It starts scanning the buzz emerging technologies and it checks if that marker file is there. If it's there, then it will say met criteria. So in this example, we found that Java-app marker file, and it said, okay, this needs the pipeline for Java. Then it's going to do the same for Hello World Node.js, but here it says that's not meet criteria because this one doesn't have the -Java app. So it will go to the next one, which is a -Node.js-app, and it will meet that criteria here in the bottom. Here. So after a scan, it's able to find those repos with those marker files. And now what we expect is to see these repos with pipelines already attached to them. So if we go back to that folder, then we can see that now they show up and they show up with pipelines, which come from the shared pipelines directory. All right, so let's do a brief overview on custom marker files. So it was released pretty old. The last mention that I could see was CJE 1.6, which is 2 years old. So hopefully you are not on a version that old, or if you don't know what CJE is, don't worry about it. You probably already have it. Then the documentation, it's here. We'll share this because there's a lot of info here. The documentation, I'm gonna go briefly through it. In this is a little bit of a different example. In here, in this screenshot, we're using the marker file as pom.xml, which says, okay, the repo that has a pom.xml, we want to run this piece of code. And it does it the same for multi-branch and for GitHub organizations. This is done from the UI. In our case, it's just instead of selecting this pipeline script, we selected from another repo, which I think it's better. And then there is a blog, which is similar to this. And this blog is the same use case, but here in the UI, you can add a stage before and after the pipeline itself. So we are reading the Jenkins file, and then let's say you have a team that created a Jenkins file and you want to make sure that you're executing stages before and after, then this will be a use case for you. Again, a downfall about this is that it's made in the UI. Okay, so things to use cases. As we saw, we provided a full Jenkins file using a marker file to another repo. And then you can also have stages before and after the Jenkins file. To keep in mind, this works with GitHub and Bitbucket. The marker file name, location, and Jenkins file names are customizable, so they don't have to be named Jenkins file. They don't have to follow that path, but it's usually better if you follow some standards like we had in the demo. Now, it's pretty much you will use the entire Jenkins file. There's no way to parameterize unless you use something that is described here. So in this example, what we do is we read that file and then we pass it to a shared library. And then what we do is we read that file and create that as a list of environment variables. So this is another approach on how you can read marker files. All right, so that's it for marker files. We were able to provide Jenkins files. Now let's talk about a new feature, which is pipeline template catalogs. Pipeline template catalogs is a feature that allows sharing Jenkins files like we saw with custom marker files, but one of the main differences is that these Jenkins files can be parameterized so that other users of the pipelines can either use default values or input their own values. In our case, we have 2 Jenkins files in the pipeline template catalog repo, one for Java and one for JavaScript. Now, these are different Jenkins files. These are not the same Jenkins files that we saw in the previous case. Another difference with marker files is that the structure of the repo has to follow what the documentation says. So in the top, we have a catalog.yaml that it's here. It has to have these variables, the name, the display name, the version, and the type. Right now, they're all mandatory, and the version has to be 1 because it's the only version that we have for catalogs, and the type has to be pipeline template catalog. Under it, we have what are the templates for the catalog themselves. So we have a Jenkins file and a template YAML file. The template YAML file will describe what the parameters for that Jenkins file is. So we have to follow the documentation on how to do this. Let me open the documentation and briefly look at it. So the catalog.yaml in the beginning, that is at the top level, as you saw, has to have these 4 variables. Then we have the parameters that are in the template YAML, and each parameter can follow or must follow these values. So you have to give it a name, a display name. Then you can put which values you want for that parameter. You can put default values for that parameter. You can put a description and a type. So if you think about a variable, you can give it a type as well, which are string, number, Boolean, or credentials. So for example, here we have 1, 2, 3 parameters. The name are repo owner, repository owner, application name. They have, the display name, and there are the types for them. Now, here is a section where you can set up multi-branch. So this works for multi-branch and for pipeline. And here you can see how I'm using the application name variable from here in this section. But these parameters are ultimately going to be used in the Jenkins file. Now, another thing to notice is that these catalogs since they're using Jenkins files, they can use shared libraries. So in the example, what I'm doing is I'm creating a Jenkins file that is not only reading the parameters from here, but it's also importing a shared library. So this is a good way to mix and match what you need. So you don't have to have everything with shared library. What I would do is first take a look at what's your need and if pipeline template catalog satisfies your needs. And if you need more extensibility and you want to write some more Groovy code, then use shared libraries. In my example, I created a Helm deploy method that all my pipelines are going to need. and I define the pods for my containers as well. So putting this in context, these are the Jenkins files that we're going to provide to the to-do application. All right, so let's show how we can set up a template catalog. So we are in our Manage Master folder, in the UI UX folder, and I created a master, Manage Master for testing, which I recommend if you are doing new stuff, always have a test master. So the first thing that I did is configure the GitHub server. That way you can get a webhook to the catalog. So every time there is a change in the catalog, you will receive it on this master. Now, this will not trigger all the pipelines, but will make them available. So if you made a change on the catalog, then you will get it automatically. And then the next time you trigger the pipeline is going to get the latest version. Now, you don't have to do this. If you want to do this manually, you're also able to do that. Then we need to set up the webhook on GitHub so it knows to send the payload to the master. So usually the payload is the name of the master, followed by GitHub-webhook/. And then we're gonna select what GitHub needs to send to us. We're gonna put pull requests in case we have branches for our catalog, and then we check that it was successfully connected. So we have the webhooks for the catalogs first. So now we're gonna actually add the catalog. We click here. Now let's stop here for a little bit. If you have a version that has a pipeline template catalog, I think it's to 164, but I have it on the next slide. You should be able to see this on your left. Now we're gonna select where our catalog is. Now if we go back a couple of slides, we have that shared pipelines repo. And this is where we wanna configure where the pipelines are. We're gonna set up some credentials for this repo. And this is gonna allow us to export that code as template catalogs. All right, so we select the credentials, we select GitHub. Now we put the owner, which is the GitHub organization, into the configuration. Now it's gonna read which repos, and we're gonna select pipeline template catalog, which is our catalog repo. We're gonna click save. And now this is gonna start scanning this repo for pipeline catalog. Now, if you have any syntax issue or it does not follow what the documentation says, it's not gonna be able to read it. And you will say here that it says, I think it's unhealthy. So every time you make a change, it's gonna do, since we have that webhook, it's gonna rescan and show the pipeline catalog. So in this case, it's already healthy. So I went ahead and now you can see that we have this Buzz pipeline catalog, and we have two templates available, one for Java and one for JavaScript, which matches what we would expect from here. We have a Java template catalog with a Jenkins file and a template YAML, and then a JavaScript with a Jenkins file template YAML. So up to now, what we've done is we just made that available to the master. Now, what we need to do is actually create a job that uses it. So first thing we're gonna do now to use that catalog is, since I said that it's gonna use is using a shared library, we have to go ahead and configure that shared library, because otherwise, when we trigger that pipeline, it's gonna crash because there's no shared library. So we define the library here. We're gonna call the name that we use at the top of the Jenkins file on that template. We're gonna select the master branch. We're gonna select modern SEM and select GitHub. Now remember, this is how we configure the shared library used by pipeline catalog. We select a credential. Now the owner again is the name of the GitHub org. That's gonna scan the repos, and now we select the shared library. Now you can add more if you want, but in this case, we only have one shared library. And that's, let me show here how that's being used so it makes more sense. Here, it's where it's used. See, this first line is using the library, and it's inside the pipeline template catalog. All right. One option I selected here is a shallow clone, so it doesn't download the whole story, the whole history, sorry, for the shared library. And it saves some time and disk space. So we have the shared library configure. Now we can go ahead and create the job that is going to use that pipeline template. First, again, we're going to go ahead and create a folder for that. And the reason why I'm creating a folder is that, remember, you are on the UA UX managed master. Now, this team right now does not need to have access to the Java applications because they're on JavaScript. So we're going to create this folder, and then we're going to select which kind of jobs you can have under this. In this, I selected only the JavaScript multi-branch pipeline, which is what we read from the catalog. So now we're only able to create these kind of jobs. So we give it a name, and then we create a JavaScript multi-branch pipeline. Now here, now that you want to create the job, you can see that it has this section that matches the variables that we had in our code, in our catalog code. So we can fill this in, and this is going to be read by the Jenkins file. So it needs we're filling out the name of the application that this job is going to be for. So we're going to do one from front end. And it's going to scan, and it was able to find a job. Now it's going to apply all those variables to the Jenkins file that was in our catalog. So now I'm going to go ahead and show the whole pipeline, but it's basically it creates a pod, it tests, and then it deploys a Helm chart in the short version. So I know it's a lot to get used to. It's a new feature. I'll recommend to take a look at those repos if you want to get familiar with and watch the videos and see how they work. They're public. Now, in order to recreate the same setup, you will have to have some configuration in Kubernetes, but you can see how it works, how we can get the parameters written and all that just by looking at the repos. I will add later more documentation if you just want to recreate them. All right, so let's do an overview on Pipeline Template Catalog. It was released in the version 2.164 2.1 in revision 2. And what it is an upgrade for the templates plugin. It went from 2.7 to 3.0. So in order to use this, you will have to have this version. It's available in modern and traditional. The documentation, we already talked a little bit about it. Here is the link. And you can go there, and there are a few examples that are not related to the examples that I'm showing, so you can use both as reference. So what are the use cases? You can provide parameterized and reusable Jenkins files to other teams. So it's a little bit more flexible than custom marker files, and it's everything from code, which is great. You can have this as a central repository of Jenkins files. Now you don't have to have everything on large shared libraries. And for teams that are new or that maybe are not familiar with Ruby, this is great help, because now they just need to input a few parameters. Now, to keep in mind, this is only available for multi-branch and pipeline. So GitHub Orbs and Bitbucket teams are not available yet. The format must be followed for repo and file names. So see the documentation for that. And there is also a use, it also supports, even though it doesn't support GitHub Orbs, it supports marker files for multi-branch. So you can add marker files to your multiple branches, and it will only trigger that pipeline from the catalog to the branches that have the marker file. That's a good way if you don't want to trigger all your branches at the same time, or if you just want to develop locally. All right, let's talk about the pipeline. That's wrong. It's actually cross-team collaboration and external HTTP endpoints. We already talked about pipeline template catalog. So what is CloudBees Core cross-team collaboration? It's a way to communicate pipelines between masters using the Operations Center as a router. So we have an example, a Hello World pipeline here that is sending an event with Hello World. So this is going to publish that event, and once it gets triggered, it's going to trigger other pipelines that have a match of that string. So it's a subscriber method. So any pipeline that has that matches what it sent will get triggered. Now this is a simple match of one word, but you can do much complex things. For example, you can set a whole JSON payload if you want. The payload already comes populated with like information about the instance ID or build job. They come already, but you can add more details to that. So here the syntax is a little bit different. You can send a JSON event instead of just a simple event. And then on the receiving side, on the subscriber side, you can do a James path query. So you can grab, see what elements you want out of that JSON and do queries for it. So you can select different things and subscribe to that pipeline or that event. So in our case, for example, since we have backend backend services and front-end services, we're gonna, once the backend location service is done, we're gonna publish a simple event with the application name and the version. And on the front end, this pipeline is gonna get triggered, but only when the application is named backend location and if the version does not have the snapshot, because I don't want to trigger every build. So if it's a stable build, then I'll trigger and run my integration tests. Otherwise, I just won't be able to trigger. Now, here this right now is hard coded. You could probably use a parameters file or something different, so you can have more control when it's triggered. So here's how it looks once you run the job once. As the same case when you have parameters parameters on the Jenkins file. First, you have to run it once and let the feature show up in the UI. And something very similar that I'm not going to show or not, I haven't used is external HTTP events. So we saw how a message can go from master to master using the operation center as a router, but these messages and these payloads can also come from external systems like GitHub, Docker, or Nexus. If they are not connected to your pipeline or you want to use them, you can also trigger these events using the operation center as a router for your pipelines. So here's a lot of documentation on how to use it. Here's documentation about the external HTTP endpoints. I'm not going to go through them because I want to get through a little bit of the other information. And there are two blogs that I think are pretty useful. This first one right here talks about simple events. The second one talks about how to use a JSON payload and trigger other pipelines. And then we have a recent one made by The Technologies. The Technologies is a group inside CloudBees that we blog about recent technologies. So you can go to cv-technologies.github.io and you can find plenty of blogs. I will probably be blogging there as well. And in this case scenario, it's a security use case. When you have one master team creating a Docker container, triggering an event, and then in another master, you're actually receiving that event and making sure that that Docker image or triggering that pipeline so that Docker image goes through a security scan. So you can distribute those two processes and make sure that all your Docker images are being scanned. So use cases for cross-team collaboration, application dependency, and external HTTP points for just outside events that come from other systems. Good to know that when you install, you're going to have if you want this feature, you have to install a few plugins in the operation center in the masters, and the control is downstream. So you will broadcast a message, and only the pipelines that want to subscribe to that message are going to be triggered. So going back to our example, how does it look now that we're going to add more folders and pipelines to our master? So we had our API managed master, our UI UX managed master. I created a folder here, and inside that folder, we use marker files for these applications. Then we uploaded the catalog, which has two templates that are used by this folder, the to-do services folder, for both of our backend services, the to-do services, the location service and the to-do CRUD service. And then on the UI UX master, what we have is, again, we imported this catalog. We have a master for this job. A folder for these jobs, and then we have a pipeline for the front end to-do service that is only based on the JavaScript template. All right, so let's go over the demo. The demo is pretty simple because I've been showing how to set up, and up to this point, everything is set up. So basically what we would expect is to do a commit and see things happening. So let me show first how the master looks. So here's the operation center. Here's the operation center. I have a folder for my managed masters under GKE. I have an API folder and my master here. And again, under my master, I have this 3 folders. Here's where my catalog is, and that's what happens when you import it. Here is the emerging services that we configure using marker files. We have to-do services here, where we have our backend services using the catalog. And then on the other master, which is under the UIX folder, we have one test. That's the one that I was showing the videos. And then we have this one. that has a folder UI UX jobs that has a front end multi-branch from the pipeline catalog. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a change in the backend, one of the backend services, which is this one. Let me close a few of the documentation tabs. So here we are, this is the backend location service, and it's on version 0.06. So we're gonna change that, bump the version, make sure that it doesn't have snapshots so it can trigger the front end and the other service. At the same time, there are a lot of things that happen at the same time. So I wanna make sure I have, give me 1 second. All right. So here, it seems that I cannot show that. Let me get out of full screen. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and commit it from here. So we're gonna make the change. Here is the repo for the backend location. And we're gonna go to this endpoint, and we're gonna change this to everything is okay. Save that. We're gonna update the POM to a new release. And we're gonna commit that. We're gonna push. So when we push, let me see if I can get, it seems that I cannot get the terminal. Here we're gonna see the pods that are running right now. And you're gonna see new pods coming in, like the Maven pod, because it's Java application, so it's gonna run, create a Maven pod, test that. Let's take a look at here. If it actually trigger that, you can see in the to-do services, the location service is actually being built. So right now it's going through a Maven build. That's why you see these pods here spinning up Maven build and Maven test. Then you will see a Canico pod building the Docker image, and then a container with Helm that is going to publish the chart. So here's Canico. In the meantime, what we can also show is this. I added this to DevOptics. So I have here, you can see that it's running now. So I created this way to see the whole application itself in one picture. So when this is done, it will go and trigger these two. And you can see the commit here as well. Another thing that you can do here is you can see the run insights, where I added both of my masters, and I can have information what's going on with that build as well. So this is pretty cool. I think if you have, when you have multiple microservices, this is something that you definitely want to take a look at, because you don't want to be scrolling around like I'm doing with different windows. So we see that this finished, and now we want to take a look at the other master, which is a UI UX master, and see if this is being triggered. So this is being triggered. So that's what we expected. Here, if we take a look at the log in the top, you can see that this was triggered by an event, which was the cross-team collaboration event that we match. Here, it was version 0.06, so hopefully this got updated. And there you see version 0.07 and everything is okay. So this is what we expected. So once you got this set up, it takes some time, but if you start thinking about reusing your pipelines, it's going to become easier to have other teams onboarded. So I highly recommend using these features. And I think that's all I have, because this is just going to finish running, and it doesn't have a change based on the backend for the front end application. So that's why I showed the backend. But that's all I have. We have 7 minutes for a few questions.
All right. Thanks, Miguel. Just to reiterate to everyone, we'll be sending out the slides and the recording. I know there's a lot of URLs that are in the slides. You'll be getting all those very soon. In the meantime, let's do some questions. I want to start with this one. Is there a way to create the catalog without going to the UI?
So the catalog was created from source code. You have to populate it through the UI. I don't know if out of the box you can do something around that, but I don't think it's possible. You create the catalog and then fill it out through the UI.
All right, let's go on to this next one. And as we're answering these, if you think of any other questions as we go, please feel free to continue asking. So let's see. Is cross-team collaboration only a core feature?
Yes, it's a core feature since it depends on the operation center. So to have the operation center, you have to have core.
All right, let's move on a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the pipeline itself?
Sure. So the pipeline itself, it comes from well, the pipeline, the template catalog. Here we can take a look at the Jenkins file for Java, for example. I have various stages. The first stage is acquiring the pod, and it's using resources from the shared library. So my pod definitions, this is Kubernetes approach. My pod definitions are in my shared library. So every stage is a pod. Then we have a stage for Maven test for Java. This is all the Java application. Then we have a build Docker image, which uses a Canico pod. And then this pushes the, I forgot to show this. This is the GCR where the images are being pushed. So 5 minutes ago, for example, we have that backend location when it's tagged with the git commit and latest. Then we have, I expect all of this to be fairly new. This is the one for front end 1 minute ago. So yeah, going back to the Jenkins file itself. So then the stage, this one is using Canico. And then the last stage is actually the one that uses the share library. We use this Helm deploy method, and we pass actually one one parameter from the catalog definition. We pass a commit hash and the version, and that is used by the share library here. Under vars, and here's where all the logic happens for Helm. Now I try to stay away from like, if there's a plugin to connect to another system, I try to do it curl. So everything here is with either curl or Helm commands. I try to not use external plugins. And I put this on the share library because all the pipelines are going to be using that method. So that's why I chose that.
All right, a few more have come in. Looks like we have time for maybe 2 more or so. Is the pipeline template catalog feature also only available in Core?
Yes, as far as I know, it's only available for Core.
Okay, let's go to this next one. Let's see. When do you recommend shared libraries, and when do you recommend pipeline template catalogs?
So I think if you already have shared libraries and you think they're too big, then see if you can migrate to template catalogs, if it makes sense. But if you're just beginning, what I would take a look at is how much Groovy code do you really want to use and maintain. And if you think your team doesn't have that capability, then try to use template catalogs so you don't have to maintain a lot of Groovy code.
All right. And then before we sign off, we are getting some questions about different features and such. If, in general, instead of going through them one by one, if people are looking to understand more about what's available to them, or maybe even a roadmap for what features are available, where do you recommend they go, or who do you recommend they contact?
So if you're always looked at the release versions website, there is every change you can compare different releases. Now, as far as if you want a new feature, you can always file an RFE, and if you're an existing CloudBees Core customer, you can always talk to your customer success manager and see the status of your RFE.
All right. We are just about the top of the hour, so to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to sign off. So the rest of the questions are going to be a bit longer to answer. We will be following up, and once again, the recording and slides will be made available. As soon as I end this, in just a moment, a very quick survey will come up just asking what you thought and what you'd like to learn more about. If you want to let us know, it'd be really helpful. Before we go, Miguel, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, thank you very much. And if anything, you can always reach out to us. And I will get a few other questions from Max and try to answer them as well, to the ones that I didn't get to. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you again real soon.